Hi, my name's Maribel. This past Thanksgiving, my sister stood at the table and joked, "Kids shouldn't take up space." Everyone laughed, except me. I paid for that dinner. I helped raise her daughter. I even signed the house over in her name to keep things simple. But somehow, I was still the one sitting in a chair without a name. They said it was just a joke. But how many jokes does it take before you realize maybe you were never really part of the family to begin with? And when I finally walked away, was that the betrayal? Or was it the first honest thing I'd done in years? The wind bit sharper than I expected for late November. I parked 2 blocks from the clubhouse. Delphine had forgotten to send me the guest parking instructions again. I didn't bother texting her. I'd learned by now. It wasn't that she forgot. It's that she didn't think I needed to know. I walked slowly, letting the weight of the wine bottle in my tote shift with each step. Outside, the sun hadn't fully disappeared, but the trees were already bare. Gold and rust-colored leaves crunched underfoot as I reached the tall glass doors. A staff member opened one before I touched the handle. "Welcome to the liqueur Thanksgiving," he smiled. I nodded. "Thanks." He didn't ask my name, didn't need to. I was invisible the moment I arrived. Inside, the room was warm, almost too warm. A long oak table ran through the center, set for 22 people. Candles flickered between pine cones and tiny white pumpkins. Each seat had a folded napkin, a gold-edged place card written in elegant cursive. I walked slowly around the table, looking for my name. Everyone was there. Ruth Ann, my mother. Lyra, Delphine's daughter. Even Chase, her boyfriend, got a seat with his name etched in metallic ink. Mine wasn't there. I paused, blinking harder than necessary. Maybe I missed it. I circled back. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and reread Delphine's last message. "Just bring wine or something simple. No need to worry, Em." Right, no need to worry. Just fund the entire thing and show up like a guest. Last month, when she said money was tight, again, I quietly covered the deposit, then the catering, then decorations. She promised she'd reimburse me once her fellowship stipend cleared. It never did. And I never asked. I placed the wine down near the bar. No one greeted me. No one looked up. I smoothed my jacket and moved toward the back corner where the extra chairs stood. I grabbed one and slid it near the edge of the table. No name card, no problem. I'd grown used to not having a seat. In the kitchen, I could hear her laughing. Delphine's signature laugh, sharp and knowing. She was talking about her latest paper on emotional labor. The irony nearly made me snort. While she sipped spiced cider and discussed theories, I was folding napkins in the back like some background volunteer. I adjusted one that had gone lopsided. This wasn't new. Last year, I cooked a side dish for the Thanksgiving potluck. Delphine didn't put it out, said there were too many carbs already. The year before that, I brought candles. She returned them, unopened. "Too strong a scent," she'd said, though I'd bought them based on what she once told me she loved. I used to think if I kept showing up, if I kept doing the right thing, one day she'd see me. Really see me. Not as the little sister who dropped out of grad school. Not as the single one. Not as the fallback plan. But as someone who held the damn thing together. Maybe this year, I thought. Maybe this year she'll say, "Thank you." Delphine's voice snapped me back. "Where's the wine?" she called from the dining room. "I put it near the bar," I said, stepping into view. She didn't turn to look. "Okay, cool," she replied, and returned to her conversation. I nodded to no one in particular and sat down in the corner chair. A few minutes passed before guests started to arrive. Ruth Ann entered first, air-kissing everyone within reach. She wore the same sage-green scarf she always did for holidays. Family lore claimed it was Dad's favorite. I doubted he ever noticed it. "Oh, you made it," she said when she saw me. "I wasn't sure if you'd come this year," I smiled. "It's Thanksgiving." She gave a small shrug and walked off to help Lyra adjust her dress. I stayed seated. Around me, chatter filled the room. Someone mentioned a recent trip to Colorado. Another complained about airport lines. Delphine held court at the center of the table, nodding thoughtfully, laughing strategically. Chase hovered behind her like a backup act. I poured myself a glass of sparkling cider and walked toward the fireplace. A decorative frame rested on the mantel. Inside, a piece of beige cardstock read in scripted letters, "Thankful for the hearts that make this home." I looked at the names on the table, the seats around me, the conversations I wasn't in, and I wondered, for the first time that evening, if they ever considered mine one of those hearts. I took a breath and turned back toward the table. Delphine stood, glass in hand. Her eyes scanned the room. She tapped the edge of her glass with a fork. The sound rang sharp, slicing through the chatter. "Let's take a moment," she said, smiling wide, "to thank those who've made this all possible." I didn't move, just listened. She went on like I wasn't even there. Her voice filled the room, measured, confident, rehearsed. "I'm so grateful for my mother, Ruth Ann, who taught me the value of showing up with grace. To Lyra, for being the light of my life. And to our beautiful circle of support, family, friends, and everyone who helped bring this evening together." That was it. That was everyone, and it wasn't me. A few claps, a couple of hears, the usual chorus of social compliance. I folded my napkin tighter in my lap, pressing the corners into my palm like it was the only thing anchoring me to my seat. I didn't say a word. I just looked down, then at my plate, then at the people around the table who didn't seem to notice anything wrong. Or maybe they did, and chose not to. Dessert plates were being cleared. People stood, stretched, poured coffee. I stayed seated, letting the hum of conversation blur into a kind of background static. That's when my cousin Julian walked over, holding something between two fingers. "Hey, Maribel," he said, chuckling. "Didn't know you still went by Valdez. Thought you ditched that guy a decade ago." I looked at the place card he was holding. My name, printed in a cheap serif font, still carrying my ex-husband's last name, the one I legally dropped 6 years ago. Before I could respond, Delphine walked by and caught a glimpse of the card. "Oh, that? I just copied everyone's info from an old file," she said, laughing lightly. "Didn't think it mattered." "Didn't think it mattered." I forced a small smile. "It usually doesn't," I said, "until it does." Julian raised an eyebrow, but I stood and walked away before he had the chance to turn it into a question. I found myself in the kitchen without thinking, hands in the sink, water running. I grabbed a dish and started rinsing it, more for something to do than because anyone asked. No one had. No one ever did. Delphine's voice drifted in from the other room. "Maribel's always been sweet, just not great with emotional nuance, you know?" Someone laughed. "Maybe Chase, maybe one of her grad school friends. I didn't care enough to check." I stopped rinsing. My hands stayed under the water, heat building up across my palms. Not from the faucet, from something else. Something older. Older than tonight. Older than last Thanksgiving. A slow-burning anger that had nowhere left to hide. This wasn't about a card. It wasn't about a name. It was about the fact that she erased me in public the same way she erased me in private. Smoothly, politely, with a smile on her face, and a story everyone else preferred. I thought of all the things I'd done in silence. Driving through that blizzard so Lyra wouldn't miss her interview. Covering the property taxes when Ruth Ann was about to lose her home. Staying late at work so I could afford to make someone else's dreams easier. And they'd boiled me down to sweet, not generous, not reliable, not essential. Just sweet. I shut off the water and dried my hands, slow and deliberate. Then I stepped out the side door onto the small patio, letting the night air cool my skin. No one followed. No one called after me. I checked my phone. Nothing. Not even a "Where are you?" from Lyra. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then put it back in my coat pocket. The wind pressed against my face, carrying the sounds of muffled laughter and clinking glasses from inside. I let it wash over me. It wasn't that they couldn't see me. It was that they chose not to. That's when it hit me. Their silence wasn't ignorance. It was permission. Permission to keep things the way they liked them. Delphine shining in the spotlight. Me, holding it steady from behind. I turned back toward the clubhouse and walked in. Past the bar. Through the hallway. Back to the dining room. I sat down in the same seat with no name. I smiled when someone made a joke. I nodded when someone passed me a plate. But I wasn't there anymore. The buzz around dessert had started. Someone rolled in a cart of pies, apple, pumpkin, pecan, while others hovered near the coffee station, balancing plates and small talk. I stood to stretch, thinking I'd head to the restroom, but a small crowd forming in the hallway caught my eye. A display had been set up near the coat closet, tucked neatly against the back wall. Strings of fairy lights framed a wide corkboard, covered in glossy photos. A handwritten sign above it read, "Our family through the years." I drifted toward it, unnoticed. They were all gathered around, pointing and laughing at snapshots, their backs turned to me. I waited until the space cleared, then stepped closer. There was Ruth Ann in her garden, holding a baby Lyra. Chase, from 2 summers ago, grilling in the backyard like he'd always been part of the family. Delphine at her graduation, again at her fellowship award dinner, and once more at her book signing. I scanned each row. Thanksgiving 2019, Mom's 65th, Lyra's 8th grade science fair, her high school awards banquet. I was there for all of them. I remembered standing behind the camera, asking people to scoot in, reminding them to smile. I remembered holding Ruth Ann's purse while she took pictures with friends. I remembered being the one who bought the banner, the flowers, the catering, but I wasn't in any of them, not one. I stood in front of that wall for nearly 5 minutes. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just assumed I was admiring it like everyone else. A voice behind me said, "That trip to Michigan was such a blast, wasn't it?" I turned to see a woman I didn't recognize, holding a glass of wine and smiling. I nodded, then pointed to the corner of the collage. "I'm not in that one." She tilted her head. "Really? I thought everyone was there." "Not quite everyone," I said, then stepped away before she could respond. Back at the table, Lyra had just unwrapped the laptop. I'd slipped it under her chair earlier that evening, tied with a silver ribbon and a note she never opened. Ruth Ann clapped softly. "Oh, wow, that's fancy. Did you get this for her, Delphine?" Delphine chuckled. "No, it's from Maribel," she said, raising her voice just enough for the table to hear. "She's always trying to convert everyone into tech people. You know how she is." Lyra looked up briefly, smiled in my direction, and muttered a "thanks" before returning to whatever was on her phone screen. The box sat in front of her, unopened. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. It tasted flat. Bitter, like it had been sitting out too long. Kind of like me. There's a certain numbness that sets in after enough small cuts. You don't flinch anymore. You just note it and tuck it away. Quietly. Precisely. My thoughts drifted, back to when Lyra was 3. Delphine had been accepted into a teaching residency on the East Coast and needed someone to take care of her daughter. I moved into their house for 6 months, balancing my job and Lyra's preschool drop-offs. I remembered teaching her to double-click with the mouse, making pancakes shaped like stars and elephants, reading the same picture book 4 nights in a row because she liked the way I made the cat's voice sound. Those memories weren't in frames on the wall. They didn't even exist in stories anymore. As far as everyone else was concerned, I hadn't been there at all. If you're not in the picture, I thought, eventually people forget you were even in the room. I stood near the buffet table, pretending to look at the pies. Around me, people laughed and shared stories. No one asked where I'd gone. No one asked how I was doing. And that was the part that landed hardest. Not that they didn't remember, but that they didn't think to. Before I returned to my seat, I glanced one last time at the photo wall. A small white card had been pinned in the lower corner, hand-lettered in Delphine's loopy script. "Family is who shows up." I exhaled through my nose. Not quite a laugh, more like something between disbelief and detachment. I showed up, I whispered to myself, every damn time. But I didn't take the card down. I didn't move a single photo. I didn't make a scene. I walked back to my nameless chair, sat down, and folded my hands neatly in my lap. Dessert had already begun. I was no longer hungry. I stayed at the table long enough to be polite, or at least to appear that way. I listened to Ruth Ann ask Chase about his woodworking hobby and nodded along when Lyra talked about a new school club she was technically co-leading. I stirred my coffee 3 times and never took a sip. Eventually, the hum of voices faded behind me as I slipped into the kitchen. Dishes were already stacked beside the sink, half scraped, waiting. I didn't ask permission. I grabbed a towel and started clearing plates. Delphine appeared a few moments later, standing at the counter across from me. She didn't look surprised to see me working. "That's sweet of you," she said, tossing her hair over one shoulder. "But we've got it covered." She said it like a kindness, but it wasn't one. It was dismissal wrapped in civility. She turned to Julian, who was pouring himself another glass of wine nearby. "Maribel's always happiest when she has a little task, keeps her grounded." He laughed, polite, uncertain. I didn't. I kept rinsing the plate in my hand and dried it slower than necessary. My fingers moved automatically, but my thoughts were somewhere else. Farther now, sharper. I left the kitchen without saying a word. Back in the dining room, people had started shifting chairs to make room for the kids. Lyra squeezed in next to her cousin, bumping elbows with a bit too much energy. Napkins were dropped. Someone made a comment about sugar highs. Delphine's voice cut across the room like a practiced joke. "Kids shouldn't take up space." Laughter. Chase let out one of his loud, obnoxious laughs. Ruth Ann chuckled behind her wineglass. A few cousins snorted. It passed quickly, just another throwaway line in a night full of them. But I saw where their eyes landed. They weren't looking at the kids. They were looking at me. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even veiled. Delphine said it with just enough of a smile to feign innocence and just enough bite to make her meaning crystal clear. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I reached for my water glass. My fingers were steady this time. I sipped slowly and set it down without a sound. "Come on," Ruth Ann said from 2 seats down. "You know she's just teasing." I didn't respond. I didn't even glance her way. Teasing implies affection. That was not what that was. I looked across the table at Delphine. She avoided my gaze. That's how I knew she meant it. There's a certain kind of smile I've learned to wear. Not the one that invites conversation, or calms tension, or smooths over other people's mistakes. No. This one is different. This one says, "I see exactly what you're doing, and I'm not giving you the satisfaction of reacting." It's the smile I wore then. I folded my napkin with care, creased it neatly in half, then in half again. I pressed it down beside my plate and leaned back in my chair. People continued talking, the joke already forgotten. But not by me, because something shifted inside me in that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, just decisively. You spend enough time pretending words don't sting, and one day you realize it's not because you've grown stronger. It's because you've gone numb. But I wasn't numb anymore. I was awake. And I was taking notes. Every time Delphine corrected my tone. Every time she turned a compliment into a dig. Every time she smiled while sweeping me aside. I had tolerated it all under the label of keeping the peace. But peace doesn't look like being erased. It looks like being respected. I didn't get up. I didn't excuse myself. I didn't throw a fit. But mentally, I had started packing. I had begun the quiet exit they wouldn't even notice. Until it was over. The conversation shifted to travel plans for Christmas. I heard someone say something about flights being outrageous. Someone else groaned about Airbnb prices in Vermont. I tuned it out. I was done thinking about shared holiday rentals. Done pretending we were building anything together. There was nothing left to build. Not for me. The room carried on without me, and I let it. I sat still while the noise swirled, forks clinking against dessert plates, someone debating whipped cream versus ice cream, Ruth Ann telling Chase she was just so proud of how he stepped in for the turkey prep. No one noticed I hadn't touched my pie. No one asked why. Delphine tapped her spoon against her glass again, this time for something more organized. "Let's go around the table," she announced, standing just enough to assert control. "Say something you're proud of this year, something you're grateful for." I braced myself. The first few were harmless. A cousin bought a house. Another finally passed the bar. Chase, of course, said something vague about finding stability. Ruth Ann beamed like she was officiating the moment. Then came Delphine's turn. "I'm proud to be entering the final year of my doctorate," she said, pausing like a well-rehearsed keynote speaker. "Grateful for the support that's carried me, our incredible mother, my strong daughter, and the friends who've reminded me of who I am." She glanced toward me, the way you'd glance at a light switch, acknowledging it exists, not appreciating it. "And of course, my sister Maribel," she continued, raising her glass slightly in my direction. "The tech genius of the family. Great salary, little soul, but she shows up." A few chuckles broke the stillness. I didn't smile, not genuinely, but I tilted my head, just enough for them to think I took it well. A party trick I've perfected over the years. Little soul. That one landed in a place I thought had already hardened. I glanced down at my place setting, the wine glass I didn't want, the pie I didn't eat, the name card that still had my ex-husband's last name on it. It was like every detail tonight had been curated to remind me I was welcome, but not quite seen. The conversation moved on. I didn't. 10 minutes later, as the group rose to refill drinks and stretch their legs, a family friend, Uncle Paul, who shows up to everything and contributes to nothing, hovered beside my chair. Delphine leaned in. "Would you mind swapping with Paul? He's more central to the family line." That's how she phrased it. Central. I blinked. My eyes fell on the chair beneath me. The same one I'd quietly added from the stack in the corner, because mine hadn't been placed. I remembered signing the catering check, the wine order, the venue deposit. I paid for the seat. I paid for the table. And yet here I was, being asked to move, for someone more central. I stood slowly. "Of course," I said, stepping back. But then I turned. "You know what? Keep the chair. And the story. I've held both long enough." The words landed like cold water on a warm table. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Ruth Ann cleared her throat. Uncle Paul looked confused. Delphine said nothing. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair and folded it over my arm. I wasn't leaving, not yet, but I wasn't staying in that spot either. "I'm good standing," I said, my voice steady. "Honestly, this room feels a little too crowded anyway." No one laughed. No one followed up. That silence? It was confirmation. I walked over to the hallway and leaned against the wall near the restroom. Not hiding, just breathing. Giving myself space no one else seemed willing to grant. In the mirror above the sink, I saw a version of me that was no longer waiting. My reflection didn't look angry. Just finished. I washed my hands slowly, not because they were dirty, but because I needed something to do while everything around me shifted. The kind of shift that happens inside, where no one can see it. The one that matters most. I dried my hands and smoothed the front of my shirt. Then I looked myself in the eye and smiled. Not politely, not defensively, just honestly. I didn't return to the table right away. I stood near the coat rack and listened as someone asked about dessert seconds. Ruth Ann laughed a little too loud. Delphine filled the space with ease. She always did. They didn't miss me. That wasn't new. What was new was that I didn't mind. I used to think strength was staying silent to keep the peace. Now I knew better. Real strength is speaking in a way that doesn't need to raise its voice. After I left the coat rack, I didn't return to the table. I lingered by the hallway just long enough for no one to wonder where I'd gone. Then I stepped outside, wrapped my coat tight, and walked the 2 blocks to where I parked. I didn't say goodbye. The drive home was quiet. No music, just the steady rhythm of tires over wet pavement and the low hum of the heater. My phone sat face down on the passenger seat, silent. It stayed that way the whole ride. When I got back to my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and sat in the dark for a while. The room felt different. Not empty, just unburdened, like I had finally set something down that I'd been carrying for far too long. I changed into a sweatshirt, tied my hair up, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed cool and pale in the dim light. My fingers moved without hesitation. I logged into the scholarship platform. Delphine's name appeared in the list of active recipients. Right below it, mine, listed as primary sponsor. 2 clicks brought up the option, remove funding. The cursor blinked, waiting. A pop-up asked for the reason. I typed change in personal boundaries. No anger, no paragraph, no explanation, just truth. I clicked submit. There was no dramatic music, no cinematic tension, but I felt it. A shift in the room. Not loud, just complete. I closed the laptop, pushed it aside, and poured myself a glass of water. As I walked to the window, my phone buzzed. I flipped it over. A text from an old coworker. Didn't you give your niece a MacBook for Thanksgiving? Just saw this on Facebook Marketplace. Attached was a screenshot. There it was. Lyra's name. A photo of the laptop still in the box. Same ribbon I'd tied, still perfectly knotted. The listing read, brand new, never used, still in original packaging. I didn't feel heat rise in my chest. I didn't gasp or clench my jaw. I just stared at the image, then locked the phone. Of course it's unused, I said aloud, to no one. Because of course it was. They never unwrap what doesn't fit their story. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the email draft I'd saved months ago. One I wrote during one of Delphine's late-night complaints about money, long before she knew I was quietly covering her tuition. The subject line read, termination of private sponsorship. I skimmed through the message, fine-tuning a few words. I attached the original funding documents, all signed by me, with clear language about the right to withdraw at any time. They never asked where the money came from. They never once said thank you. Now they'd learn what happens when I stopped. I hit send. The email went to the university, not to Delphine, not to Ruth Ann. No drama, no confrontation, just the right people, the people who matter when dollars move. I closed my laptop and leaned back. For the first time in months, my shoulders didn't feel tight. I took my glass of water and stood at the window. The sky had darkened, but the streetlight outside cast a soft orange glow across the empty sidewalk. It was quiet. No missed calls. No follow-up texts. Not even a half-hearted group message from the family chat. They won't notice I'm gone, I said softly. Not until something breaks that they assumed would always just work. I drank slowly, watching the condensation slide down the glass. I didn't feel victorious, not vindicated, just clean. This wasn't revenge. This was realignment. I thought about the years I'd spent thinking my role was to hold the scaffolding, supporting everyone else's spotlight from behind. The emotional labor, the financial patchwork, the silence. They called it family. I called it imbalance. And now I was calling it off. The next morning, I made coffee just the way I liked it, quiet, strong, and without explaining anything to anyone. The silence in my apartment felt earned now, not lonely. I opened the windows to let the air in, not to chase ghosts out. Around 2 p.m., I logged into my email and sorted through the clutter. A familiar subject line caught my eye. Subject: funding support for academic program terminated. Action required. It had been forwarded to me automatically as the sponsor on record. Attached to it was a copy of the notification sent to Delphine. I read through it without flinching. She would have opened that email somewhere between her second espresso and third superiority complex. And right below the heading, she would have seen my name, Maribel Ramos. Sponsor. Contributor. Author of every payment she'd never acknowledged. At the very bottom, just beneath the university's policy language and legalese, was my final note. This financial arrangement has ended due to a violation of personal trust. I imagined her reading it. I didn't need to see her face to know what it looked like. Confusion first, then disbelief, then fury. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Delphine. You need to fix this. Now! I set the phone down without replying. 2 minutes later. After everything I've done, you're going to humiliate me over a joke? I let it sit. A third message, longer this time. You think this makes you stronger? This makes you pathetic. Petty. You're cutting your own blood over what? Because I didn't clap loud enough for your good little tech job? I didn't answer that one either. What was there to say that hadn't already been erased or twisted into something convenient for her to believe? Later that night, I walked to the cabinet where I kept important documents, tax forms, contracts, power of attorney letters, and pulled out the red folder I hadn't opened since spring. Inside was the signed deed transfer, the one I signed 2 years ago when Delphine stood in my kitchen and said, "You make more than me. It only makes sense you hold the title. Legally. I'll manage things emotionally." She'd said it like she was doing me a favor, like her emotional labor made up for the taxes, the maintenance, the silent weight of being the responsible one. I'd believed her back then. Now I knew better. I slid the deed back into its sleeve and tucked it into a new envelope. On the front, I wrote in black ink, "In case she ever tries again." Not out of spite, not even as leverage, just as proof, so I'd never again second-guess what was real. I didn't text her back. Instead, I messaged Lyra. "Hey, hope school's going well. You're smart. Remember that doesn't come from a degree. Call if you need anything outside of tuition." She didn't reply that night, or the next day, but I wasn't waiting. That era was over. The next evening, I cleaned out my inbox. I unsubscribed from newsletters I never read, deleted old threads with urgent in the subject line that turned out to be anything but. I removed myself from the shared family calendar. Click, click, done. This wasn't rebellion. This was recalibration. I'd spent years thinking silence meant maturity, that swallowing discomfort was noble, that being the reliable one meant keeping everyone else from ever noticing the cracks. But cracks spread. Eventually, they become breaks, and I was no longer going to be the glue. The following morning, I got a voicemail from Ruth Ann. Her voice had that usual flatness she used when she didn't want to pick sides, but still wanted to sound like she was trying. "Delphine's upset. I told her you didn't mean to hurt her. Can we all just move past this?" Move past what? The years of quiet labor? The money I gave without a thank you? The way my absence went unnoticed until it cost them something? I replayed the message once, then again, then deleted it. There was no anger left in me, just a quiet, steady sense of release. The apartment had settled into its usual late evening hush, the kind of silence I used to fill with podcasts or television reruns, anything to keep from hearing my own thoughts. But now I let it sit. I even welcomed it. I was wiping down the kitchen counters when my phone buzzed from the living room. I didn't rush to it. When I picked it up, the lock screen lit up with one name I hadn't expected. Lyra. Her message was short. "Mom's been crying. She said you cut her off for no reason. Why did you do it? I don't get it." I stood still for a moment, phone in hand, heart not racing, but not still either. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't sarcasm. Just a question, raw, unfiltered, honest. I read it again, and a third time. My thumb hovered over the reply icon, but I didn't tap it. I sat down at the dining table with the phone in front of me. My old journal sat nearby, still open from the night before, pages slightly curled at the corners. I stared at the message again, not because I didn't know what to say, because I knew too well. I started typing. "Ask your mother who kept your lights on when she went back to school. Ask who helped you write your first scholarship essay. Ask who—" Then I stopped. Not because it wasn't true. It was. All of it. Every bit. But it wasn't her responsibility to carry. Not the debt, not the silence, not the explanations her mother refused to give. I erased the draft. I took a breath, deeper than necessary, then reopened the message window and typed, "Ask her who paid for your education, and why she never told you." No punctuation, no emoji, no need. I hit send and turned the phone face down. The screen dimmed to black. I left it that way, because sometimes the answer isn't more words, it's fewer. I walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and waited for the whistle. The water boiled slow, steady, unbothered. I chose my favorite mug, one with a chip near the lip that I'd stopped noticing years ago, and poured. At my desk, I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote, "I didn't disappear, I withdrew. The difference is, one feels like loss, the other feels like choice." I underlined the last sentence once, not for emphasis, for closure. The truth was, I had disappeared before. Gradually, quietly, trying not to offend, trying not to shake the fragile illusion of family harmony that rested so heavily on my back. But this was intentional. This was clarity. As the tea cooled, I flipped back through older entries, some written in frustration, others in desperation, many from years I barely remembered clearly. I studied the handwriting, sharper in my 20s, loopier in my 30s, more controlled now. I paused on a page I had written the week Delphine got her fellowship. If I keep giving, they'll eventually see me as more than the one who fixes things. I closed the journal. The person who wrote that didn't understand yet that being useful and being valued aren't the same thing. Now I did. There was no message from Lyra after that, and I didn't expect one. She would ask, Delphine would spin, maybe she'd cry, maybe she'd deflect. Maybe she'd say, "Your aunt's always had issues with attention." But I'd said what needed to be said. No yelling, no dragging history into daylight. Just one sentence. I moved around the apartment with a calm that didn't need to be earned. I lit a candle in the hallway, just because I liked the way it flickered against the framed picture of the lake from my last solo trip. I folded laundry. I ran the dishwasher. I existed. For me. Not for the phone. Not for the family group chat. Not for people who only noticed absence when it cost them something. When I finally walked past the phone again, I didn't check it. I didn't wonder if she replied. That was the quiet shift I never saw coming. I no longer needed to be pulled back in. The next morning, the sky outside my window was a pale wash of gray, like even the weather was unsure how it felt. I made breakfast without thinking. Scrambled eggs, toast, half a grapefruit. I didn't finish any of it. The voicemail from Ruth Ann had already set the tone for the day. She'd said it like she was breaking up a playground squabble, like there was no real damage, no bruises, no years of erosion masked as civility. "Your sister's hurting. She didn't mean what she said. Can't we just move past this?" I didn't feel the need to correct her anymore. It was a reflex I'd spent years sharpening, and I was done dulling myself on people who'd never listen. After rinsing the plate, I walked to the hall closet. I hadn't touched that box in months. Labeled Chicago Winter, it held the pieces of me that only came out for family occasions. The coat I wore to Ruth Ann's birthday, the gloves I'd bought for that Thanksgiving 4 years ago, and the sweater I almost wore last week. Cranberry wool, hand-stitched collar. I'd picked it because it made me feel like myself. Confident, a little bold, a little bright. But 3 nights before the gathering, Delphine had texted me, "Let's keep it low-key, nothing too flashy, don't want anyone feeling out of place." So I wore something beige, safe, forgettable. I held the sweater up to the light, running my fingers along the stitching. It still smelled faintly of lavender dryer sheets, and I felt nothing. No sting, no ache. Just the final exhale of someone who knows they'll never wear that version of themselves again. I folded it carefully and laid it inside a donation bag near the front door. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer had room in my life for symbols of restraint. I'd outgrown the version of me who waited for permission to be visible. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop. The family group chat still sat muted in the corner of the messaging app. I scrolled back, not because I wanted to rehash anything, but because I needed to see it clearly one last time. There it was, the Thanksgiving invitation. Valdez, printed neatly next to my name. My ex-husband's last name, the one I hadn't used in nearly 7 years. I never corrected it. I kept thinking, next time I'll say something, but next time always became another missed chance to stand up for myself. I didn't bother fixing it now. Instead, I deleted the entire thread. Not as a dramatic gesture, not even as closure, but because I was done holding space for versions of me that made other people comfortable. They could keep the story they needed to tell themselves. I was no longer playing the supporting role. Later that afternoon, I sat down with my journal and wrote a new entry at the top of a fresh page. This time next year, I'll be at a different table. Maybe just mine. No toast, no performance, just peace. I let the pen linger at the end, then signed my name with a slow, steady hand. My full name. No modifiers. No borrowed titles. Next to the journal, I placed a flyer I'd picked up weeks ago and hadn't been ready to deal with. It was from a nonprofit that supported scholarships for women in tech, especially first-gen college students, older returners, and those who never fit the mold. I donated quietly, anonymously at first. But now I wrote a check. And at the bottom, I requested it be designated under a new sub-fund. The Maribel Initiative, for women in tech who were never picked first. I didn't add a dedication, not in memory of, not in honor of, because this wasn't about remembering someone who'd been lost. It was about becoming someone who'd finally been found. The checkbook closed with a soft thud. I tucked everything into an envelope and slid it into my purse, ready to drop off at the post office the next morning. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the window panes. I moved through the apartment, drawing the curtains and turning on the hallway light. The candle I lit the night before had burned itself out, leaving only wax and the faint scent of cedar. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the pull to check my phone. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't hoping for recognition. I wasn't rewriting the story to make anyone feel better about how it ended. I just closed the door, boiled the kettle, and sat down at my table. The table that finally belonged to me. Before I go, I want to say this to anyone listening who's ever felt like the silent one in the family. The one who gave without being seen, who kept the peace while quietly falling apart, who thought being helpful was the same as being loved. You're not alone. It took me too long to learn that stepping back isn't the same as giving up. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop showing up where your presence is only valued for what you offer, not for who you are. We don't always get closure from the people who hurt us, but we can choose to close the chapter ourselves, not with bitterness, but with dignity. If this story made you think of someone in your life, maybe it reminded you of yourself, take a moment and ask, what part of your story are you still writing just to keep others comfortable? And what would it look like to write it for you finally? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched something inside you, leave a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if it challenged you, if it made you uncomfortable, tell me why. I welcome all voices here. And don't forget, if you want more stories like this, grounded in truth, heart, and healing, please subscribe to the channel. We've got more coming. Real stories, hard lessons, quiet victories. And maybe one of them will be yours. Hi, I'm Isleen. My parents said I was just an extra mouth to feed. They didn't scream. They didn't fight. They just left an envelope with $200 and locked the door behind me. But the part that still haunts me? They erased me so quietly, so politely, that even I started to believe I never belonged. They cut me out of photos, out of conversations, out of the family's finances like I was never meant to exist. So, what happens when the daughter they erased comes back and buys the roof over their heads? You ever wonder how far someone will go when they're pushed out of their own story? It didn't start with a slap or a scream. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of scene that leaves dishes shattered or voices hoarse. It was just dinner, the kind where everyone sat in their usual spot, like always. The dining room lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the smell of overcooked meatloaf clung to the air like a memory that wouldn't let go. Mom had forgotten the salt again, or maybe she hadn't forgotten. Maybe she just didn't care anymore. Her attention was fixed on her iPad, flipping through the slides for her next real estate seminar while pretending to be present. Dad, as usual, turned on the post-game talk radio the second he walked in. He liked the noise. Said it filled the silence, but it wasn't just silence he was covering up. It was the quiet failure of a family that hadn't spoken honestly in years. Callista sat to my right, her laptop open even at the dinner table. She barely glanced up. Her fingers tapped rhythmically, always answering, always somewhere else. She wore that half-smile she reserved for people beneath her notice me, included. Across from me was a man I didn't recognize. Dad had mumbled something about him being a former coworker or a friend from his golf league. No introduction, no hello. Just another guest I wasn't supposed to interrupt. I sat there with my fork, lifting food to my mouth out of habit more than hunger. My plate was chipped, same one I'd had since high school. Nobody had bothered to replace it. I guess it suited me. A little cracked, but still expected to hold it together. Mom poured iced tea and laughed at one of her own comments, then looked around the table like a performer waiting for applause. Then she said it. Well, it's not easy feeding 4 mouths when only 3 bring something to the table. The air left the room. The words were quiet, surgical, and somehow more lethal than any yell could have been. They cut through the radio chatter, through the clink of silverware. Even the guest paused mid-chew. Callista didn't even blink. Dad? He sipped his tea like nothing had been said, like I hadn't just been erased in real time. I looked down at my plate. I didn't say a word. I just kept chewing. Because that was the only power I had left in that moment, not to cry, not to flinch, just to finish the bite. Later that evening, after the guest had left, and the kitchen was filled with the soft hum of the dishwasher, Dad called me into the living room. The lights were dimmed low, the way he liked them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. That almost made it worse. He handed me a folder with a few pages inside. One of them was a removal form for the family health insurance plan. We're adjusting a few things, he said casually. You're almost 30. It's time to start managing your own coverage. No discussion, no, are you okay? Or, do you need help getting started? Just a signature line and a dried-out pen. I looked down at the paper. My name was printed near the bottom in faded ink, as though someone had cued it for deletion weeks ago and just forgot to hit confirm. And still, I signed. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know where else to go. What choice did I have? I walked back to my room and laid the form on my desk, staring at it under the weak glow of my old desk lamp. Some foolish part of me thought maybe, just maybe, it would transform into something else. An apology, a letter of explanation, a hidden message saying, we see you, we love you. We just didn't know how to say it. But it was exactly what it looked like, a final stroke in the quiet erasure of my place in this house. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Everything around me looked the same, walls still covered with old posters, a drawer still stuck from the time I spilled nail polish inside it. But something inside me shifted. Not a breakdown, not a scream, just a recognition. A cold, clean truth finally taking shape in the pit of my stomach. They were phasing me out. Not loudly, not violently, but slowly, strategically. The way you backspace a sentence you regret writing, one letter at a time, until nothing's left. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, and for the first time in years, I let myself remember. Graduation day, high school. I was standing in a too-long gown with sweaty palms, waiting to hear my name. I'd looked for Mom in the front row, thought I saw her head at first, but it was just a stranger. Later, she told me she had a migraine, but she'd been there for Callista's, cried the whole time, hugged her with both arms. When it was my turn, I walked across that stage alone. No camera flash, no cheer. I had told myself then that it was bad luck, that maybe next time it would be different. But deep down, I think I knew, and now I was certain. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until the light fixture blurred. Then, I whispered it out loud, not to them, but to myself. Just to make it real. They want me gone. And this time, I heard it clearly. And 2 weeks later, they made sure I was. After that dinner, everything in the house shifted, but no one said a word. Mom stopped asking if I wanted anything from the store. Dad quit updating me about which bill had been paid. Callista barely looked up when I walked into a room. The silence stretched so wide, I could almost hear my own presence. I kept to my corner, folded my laundry a little too perfectly, washed the dishes before anyone asked. I figured if I stayed useful, I'd be tolerated. I even packed a small bag, kept it in the closet behind the boxes labeled Christmas. Not out of paranoia, just instinct. Then Friday came. I had gone for a short walk around the neighborhood, more to clear my head than to go anywhere. The air was heavy, the kind of humid that makes everything feel like it's sagging. When I stepped back inside, the first thing I noticed was how still the house was. No radio, no typing, no clanking of dishes. Just silence. There was an envelope on the kitchen counter. Plain, no name. I opened it with the kind of careful dread you reserve for test results and breakups. Inside were 2 folded bills, $100 bills, and a short note in Dad's handwriting. "We think it's time. You'll land on your feet. You're smart." That was it. No, "we love you." No, "let us help." Just a clear, clean nudge out the door, like I was a fledgling that overstayed the nest. I didn't storm upstairs. I didn't demand answers. I walked back to my room and opened the closet, took out the small duffel, added a toothbrush, my charger, and a change of clothes. I left the framed diploma on the nightstand. It had always looked out of place here. When I stepped out, no one stopped me. The front door closed behind me, like a period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to write. I spent the first night at a diner, nursing a cup of coffee until sunrise. The second night, I found a bench under an old billboard that still advertised phone books. On the third, it rained. Not a gentle drizzle, real Texas rain, loud and merciless. I stood at the front steps, soaked through, and holding my bag like a life preserver. I knocked. Once, twice, a third time. The porch light flickered on, and through the sheer curtain, I saw her. Mom. She looked right at me, and then she pulled the curtain shut. She didn't need to say a word. I stood there long enough to feel the cold settle in my bones. Then I turned, walked back down the steps, and didn't look back. I ended up at a roadside motel near the edge of town, one of those places with neon lights that never quite work and a vending machine that eats your quarters half the time. I paid for a room with the cash Dad left me $200 to buy my silence and send me on my way. The room smelled of mildew and disappointment. The sheets were thin, the walls thinner. A family argued next door, voices rising and falling like background music to my thoughts. I lay on the bed, scrolling through my phone, no new messages. No missed calls. No one was wondering where I was. That night, something broke free inside me. Not a scream or a sob, just a quiet fracture. A small shift in how I saw everything, including myself. They didn't slam the door shut. They just locked it. And I had been waiting on the wrong porch. If this is what it feels like to be erased, I whispered to the empty room, then maybe I needed to vanish before I could be seen. I didn't expect my second chance to come from a coat I gave away 15 years ago. By the third night in that motel, I'd stopped pretending to care how I looked. The mirror told the truth: sunken cheeks, salt-streaked hair, eyes that didn't flinch anymore. I hadn't eaten since a vending machine lunch 2 days back, and even that was mostly stale pretzels and soda syrup. My fingers hovered over my phone. There were only a few contacts left, most of them distant, digital, or dead. But one name sat near the bottom of the list, like a footnote it never deleted. Thane Morales. We hadn't spoken since high school. Back in 8th grade, he was that quiet kid who got shoved into lockers and stuttered when he read aloud. The only thing I remembered more clearly than his nervous voice was the day I handed him my jacket in the middle of a downpour. He'd forgotten his, and taken mine off without thinking. That was just who I used to be. At 2:14 a.m., I hit call. When I arrived at his apartment, a one-bedroom above an old bakery near downtown, I hesitated at the door. He opened it on the second knock. He looked older, of course he did, but his eyes hadn't changed. Still soft, still cautious. He took one look at me, wet, exhausted, bag slung over my shoulder, and didn't ask anything. Just nodded and stepped aside. He handed me a hoodie as I walked in. It was faded blue, worn thin at the elbows. "You gave me yours back in middle school," he said. "That year, I had nothing. So I guess it's my turn." I didn't cry. I just nodded and held the fabric close, the same way you might hold a memory you're not sure is real. Thane pointed toward the couch. "It folds out if you want, or just crash as is." For the first time since I left my parents' house, I felt human. Not invisible, not extra, just seen. The days that followed were quiet in the best way. Thane lived simply, no clutter, no noise. He worked remote doing freelance tech support, fixed things around the building for a rent discount, brewed strong coffee, and never pried. One afternoon, I noticed him frustrated over a spreadsheet for billing. I offered to help. He laughed at first, but when I cleaned up the formulas, added logic, and made the dashboard intuitive, he stared at me like it turned water into wine. "You ever think about doing this again?" he asked. I didn't answer. Not out loud. That evening, while he cooked rice and eggs, we sat at the table, plates half full, silence stretching comfortably between us. "You know," he said, "when I was a kid, I thought disappearing would hurt less than being ignored." I looked at him and whispered, "Maybe it does. But it's still disappearing." He nodded slowly, then added, "You're not erased. You just got wiped clean enough to rewrite." That sentence didn't hit like a punch. It was softer, like a door creaking open after years of rust. When he went to bed, I pulled my ancient laptop from my bag. It took 10 minutes just to boot up, but the screen still glowed, barely, like it remembered who I used to be. I opened tabs, checked email, applied for 3 gigs writing, formatting, transcription. Nothing fancy, just the basics, something, anything. Then I clicked on a link for foreclosed property auctions. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I was tired of being at someone else's mercy. Maybe because if I ever got a foothold, I needed a place to stand. Scrolling through the listings, most were too far, too big, too broken, until one address stopped me cold. I stared at it, blinking hard. It was theirs, the building my parents lived in, the one I grew up seeing as solid, permanent, unshakable, now listed. Auction scheduled in 3 weeks. Starting bid, reasonable. Status, distressed. I stared at the screen for a long time, hands still, heart suddenly loud. That's their building. I didn't wake up plotting revenge. I didn't sharpen knives in the dark or dream up grand speeches. I just wanted answers. A thread of truth to pull from the tangled web my family had wrapped around me. But sometimes, life hands you a match when you're already standing in gasoline. It was a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind where even the sky seemed unsure of itself. I sat curled up on a corner cushion in Thane's apartment, my knees pulled to my chest, the soft hum of his old coffee maker the only sound grounding me to the moment. The smell of overbrewed espresso lingered in the air as I stared at the flickering screen of my dying laptop. The power cord wobbled in the port, threatening to give out, but that stubborn machine held on, like it still had something left to say. And it did. The auction site blinked back at mean old listing I'd found at midnight the night before. I had clicked out of curiosity. I stayed because of disbelief. There it was. A familiar address. 112 East Sable Street. A 6-unit building. A place I'd known my whole life. Our old family property. Listed as distressed. But that wasn't the punch. The real blow came from the name sitting under current ownership. Velcor Realty. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. A fluke. Just another faceless company scooping up leftovers from the housing crisis. But the name, it scratched at something in me, like a forgotten melody. Velcor. I opened a new browser tab. My fingers moved before my brain could catch up. Property tax portals, business registration records, digital receipts. I was on autopilot, chasing a shadow. It didn't take long. Velcor was a shell company. Its P.O. box? The same one Mom used during her cupcake empire phase, right after Callista left for college. I remember helping her design labels for the boxes. The business died in 6 weeks, but apparently she kept the LLC alive just in case. And now, apparently, just in case included mortgaging the only real asset our family had left. There it was, in black and white. Valora C. Harmon, registered agent, my mother. And then I found the mortgage documents, signed by her, in full. Same loopy V I used to copy when forging her name for school permission slips. My stomach dropped when I saw the payment history. Missed deadlines, stacked up penalties, red-lettered notices from the bank. Then the kicker, a formal default, dated just 2 weeks ago. The building wasn't just up for auction, it was teetering on the edge of being swallowed whole. I leaned back, breath catching like something was stuck in my chest. It wasn't sadness, not grief. It was something heavier, like a betrayal so layered it had no name. Valora had mortgaged the property, behind everyone's back. No family meeting, no signature from Dad. Not even a whisper to me. All those years she preached about stability, about me being irresponsible, ungrateful, unstable. Meanwhile, she was using a dead cupcake dream to quietly gamble away the roof over our heads. And Dorian, my father. He hadn't said a word. Instead of speaking up, he gave me an envelope and let me go. I thought it was cruelty. Now, I wondered if it was shame. Thane re-entered the room just as I was blinking away whatever storm was brewing behind my eyes. "You okay?" he asked gently. I closed the laptop with a click that sounded louder than it should have. "Define okay," I said flatly. He didn't push, just slid a mug across the table toward me like it was a lifeline. "Want sugar?" "No," I muttered, still staring into the void. "I want a lawyer." That got his attention. He didn't ask questions, just nodded once, and by that evening, we were seated across from one of his old college friends, real estate attorney who specialized in small LLCs and foreclosure flips, the kind of guy who didn't care about your past, just your paperwork. He slid over a stack of forms. "You want to form an investment entity?" he asked. "You just need to name it and sign." Name it. I could have called it Payback Partners. I could have called it Don't Bet Against Me, Inc. I could have made it loud, bitter, scathing. Instead, I paused, then wrote 3 letters. ISL Holdings. My name, my initials. Something simple, something mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ownership not just of the company, but of myself. I signed, submitted, and bookmarked the auction date, 17 days. That was the countdown. But make no mistake, this wasn't about saving them. I wasn't coming in like some estranged daughter-turned-hero. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a reclamation. They'd pushed me out, erased me from their story, handed my seat at the table to someone else, and smiled while doing it. Fine. Let them toast to my absence. But they never stopped to ask what it'd take with me when I left. And they were about to find out. They thought they erased me. But I was already building my return. The LLC paperwork came through a few days later. I walked to the local legal aid office tucked between a payday loan store and a dusty insurance agency. It wasn't fancy, but the man behind the desk had kind eyes and didn't ask unnecessary questions. He helped me finalize the forms. When it came time to sign, I slowed down. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to feel each letter take shape easily. My name. Mine, not borrowed, not cropped out, not whispered through someone else's mouth. The ink soaked into the page like I was carving myself back into existence. Later that night, I opened my old hard drive. It had survived 3 moves, 1 hard drop, and a thunderstorm. I was hunting for financial records I could use for freelance applications. What I found instead made me stop breathing. It was a Word document titled Statement to Use C. I clicked it, already knowing what it was. Back in my early 20s, Callista had asked for help with an MBA scholarship essay, said she needed a little polish. I'd written it for her from scratch 3 hours straight, heart and all. It was personal, about carrying a family through struggle, about being the silent foundation. I highlighted a line I remembered writing. Some daughters are born to shine. Others are built to carry weight in silence. Then I Googled it. There it was. On Callista's blog, front and center, how I became my family's backbone. She hadn't changed a word. That was mine. Not just the phrasing, the experience. She took the words I bled into for her future and pasted her name over them like a signature on a stolen painting. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stared at the screen for a long time, the kind of stare that strips the color out of things. I'd thought we had a bond back then, that maybe she saw me, even if Mom and Dad didn't. Turns out she saw me the way some people see good wallpaper decorative, useful, forgettable. The next morning, I walked a slow loop around the block near the motel. Stores with names etched on glass, people who claimed their little corner of the world. I hadn't done that. It moved through life like a draft through an open window, present, but never asked to stay. That afternoon, I attended a public zoning meeting at City Hall. I was there to understand more about foreclosure auctions, how notices went out, how bids were recorded. I sat in the back, unnoticed. Until I wasn't. A man 2 rows over leaned toward me after the meeting ended. Late 60s, plaid shirt, clean-shaven but tired around the eyes. "You're Valoris girl, aren't you?" I froze. "Thought so. You've got her edge," he said, voice low but firm, but none of her ice. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. He offered a small smile. "If you're here for the Sable Street building, good. That place needs new blood. Been rotten under the surface too long." I didn't explain myself, didn't offer a backstory or context, just nodded. It was the first time in weeks someone connected me to my family, without praise or pity, just truth. Walking back to Thane's apartment, I kept thinking about that. The way people outside your story can still see the real chapters. He saw something, not my wounds, but my shape. That night, I opened a blank Word document, titled it ISL Holdings Purpose Statement, and I began to write. Not for them. For me. They used my words. Now I use my voice. They spent years pushing me out, pretending I wasn't part of anything they built, anything they shared. But the thing about being invisible for so long, you learn how to move quietly, strategically, and when it was finally my turn to act, I didn't need noise. I needed results. The auction wasn't cinematic, no gavel, no frantic bidding war. Just a login screen, a coffee cup, and my laptop on a Tuesday morning. A few mild offers came in barely serious. Then, ISL Holdings submitted the final bid. Strong. Unshakable. The moment I saw the words, "You won," pop up in bold on the screen, I didn't grin. I didn't clap or text anyone. I simply whispered to the air of my quiet kitchen, "I don't need applause. I just need the deed." By noon, I had already drafted the new notices, rent adjustments, maintenance expectations, late fee schedules, all within regulation, all enforceable. The documents were cold, fair, and effective. No emotional language, just numbers. But for one unit, Unit 4B, Valora and Dorian's apartment, the rent would rise by 213%. That number wasn't random. It came from spreadsheets, repair logs, missed payments, and a history of entitled comfort subsidized by family loyalty. Loyalty that apparently had a one-way expiration. Some might call it revenge. I call it balance. The property manager I hired was sharp and discreet. She had no idea I had lived in that building as a child, had memories in its stairwell, or had once fixed the porch light myself when Dad didn't have the time. She only knew that ISL Holdings paid its invoices on time, filed its documents early, and followed every city code to the letter. That's how I wanted it. No drama, just business. The first tremor arrived via text Callista, of course, stirring the pot in the old family group chat like we were still pretending to be whole. Who jacked the rent this high? Valoris freaking out. What even is this? Seconds later, Valora chimed in. This new landlord is a monster. No warning, no notice. Typical, no soul. Dorian stayed silent. So did I. Later that day, I tried logging into our old family Dropbox where Mom used to store scanned W-2s, birth certificates, insurance docs. It gave me a clean rejection. Access denied. I checked the logs. My email had been removed. No alert, no message. I wasn't just being cut off. I was being erased. Out of caution, I called the bank where Dad opened a joint savings account in my name when I was 14. I'd left it untouched for years, out of respect. It was closed 6 weeks ago, the rep told me. No letter, no courtesy call. Just gone. I hung up, sat in silence, let the fact sink in, not just that they had shut doors, but that they were redoing the blueprints to a house that no longer included me. But this time, I didn't collapse. Instead, I double-checked the tenant list, reviewed the upcoming repair timelines, noticed that the heating ducts in Unit 2C were overdue for cleaning. I sent a note to the maintenance team. Then I opened my inbox and signed off on the insurance renewal for the building. I didn't cry. I clicked. They could pretend I didn't exist. I could prove I did through deeds, through signatures, through paper trails and tax filings. They had one narrative. I had the receipts. 3 days later, a message landed in the tenant portal. The subject line was blunt. Appeal. Rent increase urgent. It read, "We've lived here for over a decade, never missed a payment. This is unfair, excessive, and honestly cruel. Who does this to people they know?" It was signed by Valora. I stared at it. No guilt, no rush of satisfaction either. Just a steady understanding. This was the price of rewriting someone else's story. I forwarded the email to the manager with one note. Respond per lease clause C. No exceptions. I didn't owe them an explanation. I had already spoken through contracts, through structure, through silence. That night, I drove by the property. Just once. I didn't stop. Just circled the block and looked. The porch light was still flickering. It used to be mine to fix. I remember being 13, climbing up on a chair with a new bulb in hand, just trying to be helpful, hoping someone would notice. No one ever did. Now the porch light still blinked, but on my property, under my name, paid for by someone they said wasn't worthy of having anything. They built walls to shut me out. I turned them into doors and walked right through. But when you open a door they thought was locked, they don't just panic, they attack. I woke up to 5 text messages, 2 from former classmates, 1 from an old family friend, the last 2 from people I hadn't heard from in years. Hey, you okay? What's going on with your mom's post? I clicked open Facebook not because I cared what Valora posted, but because I already knew it would be about me. There it was, a sepia-toned family photo from a summer picnic years ago. The caption read, "Some children choose greed over blood. Some betray their own. We gave everything. They gave us paperwork. I was in the photo. Or I had been. Now my face had been cropped just enough that only the curve of my elbow made it in. The illusion of family, staged perfectly. The comments were full of sympathy, Bible verses, the usual Midwestern pity parade. A few cousins chimed in. "So sorry, Aunt Valora. You did everything you could. One even asked if it joined a cult." Callista messaged me directly. "What did you do?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth didn't belong in a thread full of hand-clapping emojis and self-righteous grief. I took a screenshot, then blocked Valora. A few days passed. Then came the formal email from Callista. "We're hosting a retirement dinner for Dad. HOA requires all tenants to attend, including new ownership. You'll need to be present." It wasn't an invitation. It was bait. I accepted. The evening of the dinner, I wore a blazer, nothing flashy, just clean, structured. I tied my hair back, clipped a badge with ISL Holdings on it to my lapel, and carried a slim clipboard. I didn't knock when I entered the community hall. I didn't need to. The room quieted the second I walked in. Valora didn't recognize me right away. Dorian glanced up, then looked back down. Callista paled. I took my seat at the end of the row, across from them, but never once looking their way. The HOA manager stood to speak. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin the celebratory portion of the evening, we'd like to introduce the new owner of the building, who is present for any tenant questions. I stood. My name is Isleen Harmon. I represent ISL Holdings, the managing company of the property. Lease terms have been updated across all units. Market rates apply to everyone equally. There will be no exceptions. Thank you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My eyes landed briefly on Valora. Then I sat. No one clapped. No one breathed. The rest of the dinner was a quiet horror show. Valora clutched her fork like it might shatter. Dorian pretended to read the program over and over. Callista smiled too much, too tightly. I didn't stay for dessert. As I walked out, I passed the photo display set up near the door. Family memories, school ribbons, black and white shots of our grandparents. My photo was missing, of course, but I noticed one space with a thumbtack and no frame. I stopped in front of it for just a moment. Not to mourn, just to note the vacancy. That night, as I settled into my apartment, I checked Facebook again. Valora had posted again. Some doors open both ways, but not all exits lead to mercy. The likes were fewer this time. A few comments. One person asked if she was okay. The post smelled of desperation, wrapped in poetry. I didn't comment. I didn't share. I just stared at it for a moment and whispered, let them talk. I own the room they whisper in. The truth has a strange rhythm. It starts as a whisper, just low enough to ignore, but it grows. And eventually, if you don't listen, it walks right up to your front door. It was a gray Tuesday late afternoon. The kind of day where the light feels heavy, like it's struggling to make it through the clouds. I was folding laundry when I heard the knock. Not a polite tap. Not urgent. Just hesitant. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I opened it, and there stood Amanda. Her presence was disarming. She looked smaller, somehow, her eyes tired, makeup barely hanging on like it had been brushed on over a restless night, or maybe even tears. Her hair was pulled back in that high-tension ponytail she always wore when trying to control something that wouldn't behave. I'm not here to make peace, she said before I could speak. I have to ask you something, and I want the truth this time. I stepped back, motioned her in. She walked inside like someone entering a courtroom they never agreed to be summoned to. Careful, defensive, braced for judgment. She didn't sit, just opened her bag and pulled out a worn manila folder. She set it on the table between us like it was a shared burden. It was in the HOA folder, she said, voice tight. I found it while helping Mom sort through the renewal packet. She doesn't even know I kept this copy. She opened the folder herself. I hadn't moved. The first page was a printed PDF spreadsheet formatting, black ink on ivory. Cold, clinical. At the bottom right, Valora's signature stamped neatly in digital cursive. Above it, a budget breakdown labeled Projected Household Expenses, Year 29. She pointed to one line in particular, Eliza Dependent Expenses, $18,230. Amanda tapped her nail on my name. She listed you, she said quietly, like you were a subscription, therapy, utilities, food, like you were a recurring charge she forgot to cancel. I stared at the paper, then at Amanda, but said nothing. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been buried beneath years of denial. I always thought Mom exaggerated about you, she admitted, voice shaking. But I didn't think it was this cruel. I didn't think she was capable of reducing you to a number. The silence between us stretched long, held only by the hum of the ceiling fan. Like even it wasn't sure what to say. Amanda finally sat down. I should have known, she murmured, more to herself than to me. Back when she wouldn't let you give a speech at Dad's retirement dinner, or when she blamed you for the missed mortgage check when it was actually mine. I kept making excuses for her because it was easier than looking at what she really was doing. She pulled out another document. This one was a lease agreement. She slid it toward me. I leaned in. There it was, my name. In the section labeled Property Ownership Transfer, ISL Holdings, under the LLC's parent authorization. My name, clear as day, in the signature field. Dated. Signed. Sealed. Amanda blinked hard. You were the only one who never asked for credit, she whispered. That's how I should have known it was you. You never needed the spotlight, just a little space to be. I got up and poured 2 cups of tea. It was stale, borderline cold, but neither of us cared. We sat there, hands around mugs that didn't warm us much. No cheers, no apologies, just quiet. For once, no one interrupted. No one talked over me. We just listened. I don't expect you to forgive me, Amanda finally said. Her voice was flat but brittle, like a glass already cracked down the middle. I don't expect to forget, I said, stirring sugar into my tea, but I'm done setting fire to things just to prove I was cold. Amanda nodded. There was no grand emotional collapse, no hug, no promises. Just 2 sisters breathing in a space that finally had room for both of us. As she picked up her folder and made for the door, she hesitated. You were never the extra mouth, she said. She just didn't know how to handle more than one voice in the room. I walked her out. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange any well-talk soon, but I did give her something before she left. Next time, I said gently, knock with truth, not fear. When the door closed behind her, I stood for a long time. Then I went back to the table, reopened that first PDF, and highlighted my name. It was just black ink on a page. But that line, that expense label, they'd spent years trying to bury me under it. I opened another file on my computer, my draft will. It wasn't complete yet. But one clause had just become crystal clear. To be seen is not a favor granted by others. It is a right I reclaim quietly, permanently, and without apology. I didn't need revenge. I needed space to breathe, so I built it, inch by inch, in my own name. The letter arrived on a gray Wednesday morning. It wasn't stamped. No return address, no tracking code. Just a plain white envelope slipped carefully through the mail slot. Like whoever delivered it didn't want to be seen, but still needed to be heard. That told me everything. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Slanted cursive, almost too neat. She'd always taken pride in her penmanship, as if forming perfect letters somehow proved she was a good person. I unfolded it slowly. 3 lines written like a sigh. You never really said what you needed. Maybe we assumed too much. You could have spoken up sooner. That was it. No apology, no ownership, no reflection, really. Just a gentle push of blame dressed up like empathy. I read it once, then folded it back, sealed it in the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer with old phone chargers and expired coupons. I didn't need to reread it. I'd memorized that pattern years ago. That kind of silence, the kind used like a scalpel, had always been her specialty. I didn't write back. Instead, I picked up the keys to my building, the ones with the red ribbon I tied on, just after closing, and walked the hallways like a woman who finally owned her air. On the 2nd floor, Mrs. Ellison was outside her apartment, crouched over a crate of soil and ceramic pots. Lavender, she said, offering me one with soft petals and rich earth. It helps things grow, and it keeps the bitterness away. I thanked her, carried it down to the lobby, and placed it near the window, where the light could touch it in the afternoons. Then I climbed the stairs back to my apartment, each step an act of returning to myself. A few days later, I walked to the community center for a local event, Legacy of Our Neighborhood. I hadn't planned to go, but something about the word legacy made me curious. Who exactly did they think helped build this neighborhood? Who did they still pretend never existed? Inside, photo collages lined the walls. Snapshots of old storefronts, parades, block parties, graduations, and baby showers. Generations framed in laughter and sepia tones. And then, there it was, tucked in the lower left of a family collage. A photo from over 2 decades ago. My parents stood at the front porch of our old house, looking young and sure of themselves. Between them stood a little girl with crooked bangs and untied shoes. You could barely see her, half her body cut off at the frame's edge. No label, no name. I looked at it for a long time, not with pain, with recognition. They'd always edited me out, even in the photos they displayed. I wasn't part of their picture. Not really. I left without saying anything. Didn't need to. That night, I went home, opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, and found the only childhood photo I had kept. Me, age 6. Knees scraped, holding a garden hose in my lap like it was a trophy. I stared at it, thinking about the little girl I used to be with, one who tried so hard to be enough for people who only saw her when she was useful. Then I walked into the kitchen, lit the small incense bowl I kept beside the window, and gently placed the photo inside. It curled, blackened, and disappeared into smoke. Not out of anger, out of peace. I wasn't her anymore. Not the little girl waiting to be invited. Not the young woman holding her breath, hoping the next family dinner wouldn't hurt as much as the last. I finalized my will the next morning. Half of everything I had savings, stocks, my condo would go to a fund for women leaving controlling or emotionally abusive homes. I named it after my mother's maiden name, because sometimes irony is the sweetest form of clarity. On the last page, under Purpose Statement, I wrote, "For the ones they called extra." Later that evening, I recorded a short message for the scholarship archive I'd helped fund over the years. No makeup. Just me, sitting at my desk, speaking with the kind of calm that only comes after surviving silence. They edited me out of their story, so I wrote my own. If you're watching this, maybe you need to do the same. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. Just closed the laptop and let the moment settle. That weekend, I passed the old house again. The windows were lit from inside. Laughter from the backyard. Children's voices. Maybe theirs. Maybe someone else's. I didn't slow down. Just walked past. Breezed by like the ghost they once made me feel like. Then I whispered to the wind, "I forgive you. Not for them. For me." Because healing isn't about getting even. It's about walking away and not looking back. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one building the foundation beneath everyone else's feet. You can be erased from a photo, cut out of a family story, even written off on paper, and still write yourself back in, with your own pen, in your own words. I used to believe forgiveness had to be earned with apologies, but I've come to understand. Forgiveness is something you give yourself when you're ready to stop carrying the weight of people who never truly lifted you. Now I'd like to ask you, have you ever been made to feel like the extra mouth, the one who didn't belong? What did you do with that pain? Did you fight back? Did you grow from it? Or are you still carrying it quietly? If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop a 1 in the comments if it touched something real inside you. Or tell me your city. Let's make this a space for voices that were once silenced. And if this video didn't connect with you, I respect that too. Let me know why and where you're tuning in from. I believe in learning through listening. If you'd like to hear more true stories like this, about quiet strength, resilience, and reclaiming your place in the world, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. You never know when the next story might feel a little like your own. Hi, I'm Tamsin. I paid for the house, the meals, the boat tours, everything. And yet, the night we sat down to dinner, my mother looked at me and said, "This trip isn't about you." They wore shirts with everyone's name but mine, gave my concert ticket away to a stranger, replaced me in photos, in bedrooms, in the story they told the world. But what hurt more than the erasure was how natural they made it look. So I did the one thing they never expected. I stopped funding the fantasy. Ever wonder what it takes for a woman to freeze her own family out of her life? And her wallet? I arrived in Destin late afternoon on a Thursday, the sky leaning toward gold as the sun dipped closer to the water. My suitcase rolled awkwardly across the gravel driveway, the wheels catching in loose stones. I could hear laughter from the porch before I even reached the steps. Vera opened the door just wide enough for a quick hug that never really landed. "You made it," she said like I'd dropped in uninvited. Behind her, Callista was already snapping selfies with Leora and Declan, the filters already smoothing out their smiles. She didn't even glance in my direction. The house was beautiful, clean, curated, coastal chic. Everything matched except me. I placed my bag by the guest room door, the smallest one in the back, and took a breath before joining them on the patio. It wasn't that I expected fanfare, but I thought maybe something more than "you made it." Dinner that evening was grilled snapper, corn on the cob, and watermelon salad, Callista's idea. The table was set for 8, even though only 6 of us were there. Declan had brought his cousin for the first night, but he'd left before I arrived. My seat was next to Leora, across from Vera. Conversation flowed easily about Leora's new swim class, Callista's latest brand deal, Vera's insightful take on the news. I nodded where appropriate, offered to pass the butter, and smiled too much. Halfway through Callista's retelling of some hilarious airport mix-up, Vera suddenly turned to me, napkin folded neatly in her lap. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "This trip isn't about you, Tamsin," she said, cutting through the table like a knife. "Please don't make it about yourself." The table fell into a strange hush. No one gasped. No one defended me. Forks still moved, glasses clinked. Even Leora just looked down into her lemonade like she hoped it might swallow her. I managed a half smile, bit into a piece of corn that suddenly tasted like nothing, and nodded as if I agreed. I didn't speak for the rest of the meal. I didn't trust what might come out. That night, I stared at the ceiling fan blades spinning above me, counting their rotations until I lost track. The next morning, the house buzzed with plans. Vera had laid out matching t-shirts for the family, navy blue, with Jennings Beach Week 2024, printed in cursive across the chest. I found mine still in the shopping bag, folded neatly on the counter. A sticky note stuck to the plastic read "Tamsin." When I held it up, Vera laughed. "They must be auto-corrected your name, sweetie. You know how tech is." No one else seemed to notice, or care. We walked to the dock together. Callista held Leora's hand, Declan carried the cooler, and I trailed behind with the towels. A young man managing the morning tours approached us with a clipboard. "You with the Jennings family?" he asked, scanning the group. Before I could answer, Vera smiled and said, "Oh, she's just tagging along." The man nodded, like that explained everything, and turned to count life vests. I stood there, blinking. The wind pushed hair into my mouth. No one turned back. I stayed behind while they boarded the boat, claiming I had a slight headache. Vera nodded, didn't offer anything more. On the walk back alone, my sandals rubbed blisters into my heels, and my throat burned from saying nothing. "I paid for the Airbnb deposit," I muttered aloud, voice catching in the sea air. "I shipped Leora's birthday bike. And Im just tagging along?" But I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. Instead, I made coffee, sat on the porch swing, and watched the sky shift from seafoam to cerulean as the sun rose higher. "It's only day 1, I told myself. Maybe tomorrow will be better." But even I didn't believe that anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I drafted a letter that made silence into a sound they couldn't ignore. The message started soft, then steady. "Baby girl, I know they make you feel like you're not needed, but I saw you. I always saw you." We sat down for lunch the next day at a waterfront spot with picnic tables, umbrellas fluttering in the breeze, and the smell of fried oysters wafting through the salt air. Callista had chosen the place. "Very local, very authentic," she said, with the confidence of someone who had skimmed Yelp reviews while tanning. The waiter dropped off the check without asking who was taking it. That's when Callista, cheerful as ever, announced loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, "Tamsin's got this one. She always does." Leora clapped her hands and said, "Auntie Tamsin pays for everything." Everyone laughed. Vera gave me that familiar look, part proud, part expectant, and said, "You're always so generous." I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. I just pulled my card out and tapped it like I had so many times before. The screen flashed, $413.78. I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself it was just lunch. Told myself I was being included. But it felt more like I was paying rent for a seat at their table. Back at the house, while they napped or scrolled their phones, I opened my banking app. The boat tour Callista had mentioned earlier, just a little treat Declan and I, booked for the weekend, had already been paid for. And it wasn't Declan's card. It wasn't Callista's either. It was mine. A $780 charge, labeled Jennings Charters. I'd given Vera access to my backup card 2 years ago in case of emergency. Apparently, keeping Callista's couple's getaway afloat counted as one. That night, while everyone gathered on the patio to play card games, Callista uploaded a collage to her social feed. Family is everything. It was a carousel sunlit moments of them laughing at lunch, riding bikes along the boardwalk, hugging on the dock. The photo taken during lunch-own of the most liked showed everyone at the table mid-toast. I wasn't in it. I'd taken the picture. A comment popped up beneath the post. "Where's Tamsin?" It was visible for all of 30 seconds before it vanished. I added my own, just a line. Just enough. Photographers don't count, I guess. It disappeared within minutes. No reply, no call. Just more hearts and clapping emojis from people who didn't know better. I left the patio quietly, walked to the edge of the beach behind the house. The wind smelled like sunscreen and low tide. The moon floated above the water like it was keeping a secret. I sat on the porch swing and opened the family group chat. Dozens of messages I hadn't seen, plans I wasn't included in, inside jokes, voice notes from Leora, a meme Vera didn't understand but laughed at anyway. There were spreadsheets for meal prep, links to pre-ordered groceries, a shared folder titled Jennings Memories 2024. Not one picture with me in it. I thought back to last April, when I funded Leora's entire birthday party. The bounce house, the catered cupcakes, the glitter face painter. Vera had promised, "Well, make sure everyone knows it was you." 2 days later, Callista posted a video recap. Caption, "Auntie Callista pulled off another perfect day. I remember watching it alone in my apartment." I didn't comment, didn't text, just sat there and let the silence settle around me. Tonight felt the same. I whispered into the dark, more to myself than anyone else. You don't get credit for keeping a system running when no one sees you as part of it. And that was it. That was the thing. I hadn't been forgotten. I hadn't slipped their minds. I'd been carved out erased with intent and precision. They didn't lose me. They'd never counted me to begin with. That night, I opened a voicemail I hadn't dared to touch in 3 years. It wasn't just a message. It was the only voice that never made me feel small. I lay in bed, face lit only by the soft glow of my phone screen. Everyone else had gone to sleep hours ago, and the house had settled into that strange kind of silence that only comes when people are too proud to apologize out loud. I opened my voicemail folder, not the one for new calls, but the one labeled Don't Delete. There it was, Raymond, my father. The message had been sitting there for 139 days. I counted once, never had the nerve to open it again. But tonight, after being erased from yet another group photo and watching my name vanish from a comment thread like it had never existed, I tapped play. Baby girl, I know they make you feel like you're not needed. But I saw you. I always saw you. His voice was slower than I remembered. Deeper. Not because it had changed, but because I had forgotten how much safety lived in it. He talked about a dinner I had hosted years ago. The one where Vera showed up late and left early. Where Callista made a toast that somehow forgot I'd organized the entire evening. You came early, stayed late, Cleaned dishes you didn't dirty. That's who you are. But I need you to remember, you don't have to prove your place to people who would rather forget you than thank you. I listened twice, then again. I closed my eyes and let his voice live inside me for just a few more minutes. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even emotional. It was factual. He saw me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel broken. I just adjusted. Like my spine straightened itself. The next morning, I went out to the back porch while the rest of the house was still tucked in. Vera's curtains were drawn. Callista's door was slightly open, fan humming from inside. I carried my coffee out, wrapped a towel around my shoulders against the breeze, and sat in the swing chair. Leora padded outside in socks and a long t-shirt, rubbing her eyes. "Aunt Tamsin?" she asked, voice still sticky with sleep. "Do you need help with money?" I blinked. "What?" "Grandma said you always waste it. That's why you work all the time, right?" I stared at her, this kid who only knew what she'd been told, who repeated things like facts because no one had told her they were lies. I didn't correct her. Didn't tell her Vera was wrong. I just smiled and said, "No, honey, I don't need help. I need boundaries." She nodded like she understood, then wandered back inside without another word. That hurt more than anything Callista had ever said to my face. It wasn't cruelty, it was conditioning. They weren't just ignoring me, they were rewriting me in real time, planting it in the minds of people too young to question the script. Later, after the morning bustle began and everyone got ready for another over-planned bonding activity, I went for a walk along the shoreline. I didn't bring my phone, just myself and the wind. I thought about how many times I'd rewritten myself to fit. How I'd bitten my tongue so hard it nearly became muscle memory. How every time I heard, "Don't make it about you," I made myself smaller. And for what? So they could assign my kindness to someone flashier? Louder? More photogenic? Every time I said it's no big deal, I'd buried another version of myself. The quiet one, the reliable one, the background character in a show she paid for, but never got to star in. I reached the end of the cove, where the rocks jutted up into the water and the waves cracked softly against them. I sat on a large stone, let my feet dangle, and took a deep breath that I hadn't realized I'd been holding since Colorado. That voicemail wasn't just reassurance, it was evidence that once someone who mattered saw me clearly, not as sensitive or complicated or dramatic, but as someone who showed up. I whispered to the wind, "I'm not leaving because they didn't include me. I'm leaving because they're pretending I never did." And in that moment, for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel erased. I felt real. She was telling another version of me, one she'd crafted carefully for an outsider. But this time, I didn't just listen, I documented. It was mid-afternoon, and the kitchen smelled like lime and cut cantaloupe. I was slicing fruit quietly, trying to stay out of the way, blending into the rhythm of the house like I always had. From where I stood, I could hear voices drifting in through the open screen door, Vera's tone, syrupy and performative, the one she used when explaining me to strangers. "She's always been sensitive," she said with a light chuckle. "We've tried everything, but she sees things that aren't even there. Drama seems to follow her." A second voice joined Callista, naturally. "Remember her graduation?" she said, like it was a punchline. She cried because her name wasn't on the banner. She made the whole day about herself. The knife in my hand paused mid-slice. My fingers didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. I just stood still. Then, with 2 taps, I opened my voice memo app and hit record. I didn't speak. I didn't walk out to confront them. I didn't defend myself. I just let them keep going, spinning a version of me that sounded polished, familiar, rehearsed. It wasn't the lies that cued it was the ease. The way the words rolled off their tongues like they'd said them before, like they believed them more with each retelling. A few hours later, Leora ran into the kitchen, still wearing her dolphin print swimsuit. "Aunt Tamsin! We're going on a dolphin boat! Grandma said she booked it just for us." I smiled, not wide enough to mean it. "That's great, sweetie." She skipped off to change, her feet slapping lightly against the tile. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app. The charge was there, already processed, $675, billed to the card Vera still had access to. I'd given it to her years ago just for emergencies. Apparently, a dolphin tour for Callista and Declan now qualified. I didn't ask them about it. Didn't point out the irony of me paying for an event I wasn't invited to. Instead, I took a screenshot and saved it to a new folder. Emotional Overdrafts. I titled the image, July 4th Tour. Confronting them felt pointless. They weren't debating reality. They were performing a play. I wasn't in the cast. I was just the sponsor. Back in the hallway, I walked past their rooms. Coordinated outfits were already laid out, matching linen shorts, pastel button-downs, even a new pair of sunglasses on Declan's nightstand, still with the tag on. From the living room, Callista's voice floated out. Don't forget the Instagram captions, short and sweet. Tag the charter, too. No one asked if I was coming. No one noticed when I didn't pack a beach bag. They loaded up the van in the driveway with excited chatter and posed for pictures by the palm trees. I stayed behind, sitting on the porch swing with a glass of water and my phone. I replayed the audio recording from earlier. My voice wasn't in it, but I was everywhere in it. Every pause Vera used to sound compassionate, every fake laugh Callista forced it, was all theater. And it finally stepped into the role of audience, not cast. I whispered into the quiet, "If you're going to write me out, I'll make sure the real version survives." Then I saved the recording, uploaded it to my cloud, and titled it, Unedited, July 3rd, 2:12 p.m. That evening, over dry chicken and forced laughter, they turned their eyes on me and dared to ask why I was ruining the trip. The table was set just as Callista liked it. White linens, flickering battery candles, napkins folded into tiny sailboats. Dinner was grilled chicken and some half-burned cornbread. Vera insisted on finishing herself, as if overcooking things gave her control. I carried plates to the table, aligned the cutlery, and topped off the lemonade pitcher. Not a single thank you, not even eye contact. Leora was doing a little cheer routine on the grass near the patio, humming a song from the dolphin tour it financed, but never attended. Callista's phone was clipped to a tripod, capturing natural footage for her next family reel. Her camera lens swept over the table twice. Neither time did it linger on me. I sat silently, chewing through my meal. I wasn't planning to speak unless someone forced me to. They did. Vera started. She set down her fork and folded her hands like she was about to offer a prayer. "Tamsin," she said with that brittle voice she used when pretending concern, "you've seemed a bit distant this week, not your usual self." Before I could respond, Callista leaned forward, elbows on the table like we were at a reunion intervention. "We all came here to reconnect, to make memories," she said, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're making it really hard to do that." My jaw clenched, but I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Uncomfortable or uncooperative?" Vera blinked. "That's not what I said." "No," I replied, "but it's exactly what you meant." The silence that followed was so heavy it made the paper lanterns sway. Leora paused mid-cheer and looked over. Declan busied himself with cutting more chicken. Nobody jumped in to defend them this time. I reached into my pocket, opened the voice memos app, and hit play. From my phone came Vera's voice, syrupy and smooth. "She's always been sensitive. We've tried everything, Callista. She cried at her graduation, over her name not being on the banner, made the whole day about herself." I placed the phone on the table, let it play without commentary, without context, just sound and truth. When it ended, I looked up. "You've been telling a version of me for so long, you've started to believe it's the only one that exists," I said. "But I've been the one cleaning up behind your stories, fixing the mess, making sure the gaps don't show." No one spoke. Even Vera, usually so quick to spin, seemed to have lost her words. "You want me to apologize for making things uncomfortable," I added, "but the discomfort isn't mine. It's yours because I'm not shrinking anymore." Declan put his fork down finally. "I think I'm gonna head inside," he mumbled, eyes locked on his plate. I finished the last bite of my chicken. No dramatic exit, no grand speech, just stillness. I stood, picked up my plate, and walked toward the kitchen door. Vera began to say something, maybe another correction, maybe another manipulation. I didn't care. I lifted one hand with a single finger raised, not rude, not hostile. Just a signal. Enough. Inside, I rinsed my plate, stacked it in the dishwasher, and toweled my hands dry. Then I went to my room, pulled out my laptop, and opened the shared family account dashboard. Logged in, breathed. For the next hour, I combed through spreadsheets, reservation logs, and automated payments. No one knocked, no one called. I wasn't being dramatic anymore. I was documenting the truth they'd tried to delete. Declan had taken my seat. Callista had taken my credit. But I'd taken the receipt. I woke to the scent of coffee already brewed and the hollow kind of laughter that comes when people are too aware they're being watched. The family was buzzing. The concert was today. The one I'd spent weeks planning, months ahead, pre-booking 6 seats, sending confirmation emails, even adjusting schedules so Vera wouldn't miss her Tuesday water aerobics back home. I hadn't been thanked, but I didn't expect to be. Still, I didn't expect to be forgotten. I walked into the kitchen just in time to hear Callista say, "It's going to be perfect." 6 seats, Declan and I up front, Mom and Leora just behind. I didn't hear the rest. I only heard the count. "Where's my seat?" I asked, quiet but firm. The room stilled for a beat. Vera turned from the sink, drying her hands with a dish towel. "We thought you weren't interested anymore," she said in that voice she used with cashiers and waiters. Overly polite, built for dismissal. "You've seemed so distant," Callista chimed in without looking up from her phone. "We gave it to Aunt Marie's neighbor's son. You know, that cute one who's staying down the block." I nodded, slowly, like I was trying to understand a foreign language. I opened my Venmo app, scrolled back 3 weeks, and there it was, $740. The note read, "Full payment, family concert night." I didn't say a word. Not because I didn't have one, but because silence, wielded well, is louder than any accusation. I went upstairs, needing air that wasn't recycled through fake grace. When I opened my bedroom door, I froze. My suitcase was gone. In its place was a note, scribbled in Vera's familiar cursive. "Hope you don't mind." Switched with Declan so he can sleep next to Callista. "Yours is the guest room near the laundry. Love, Mom." The new room, if you could call it that, was a narrow box beside the utility closet. No windows. A twin mattress that sank in the middle. The scent of chlorine and dryer sheets clung to the air like mildew trying to masquerade as clean. I stood there, holding the note. Then I folded it slowly, slid it into my pocket, and walked back to retrieve my suitcase. It was parked against the wall outside the laundry room, zipped but slightly unlatched, like even it didn't want to stay. I didn't cry. I didn't pack in a fury. I moved with robotic calm, folding the clothes I had just unpacked 2 days ago. Shirt, pants, dress I never got to wear. I zipped the suitcase closed, then opened my laptop. Airline app, return flight, available seat zone left for the next morning. I booked it. Then I logged into the shared family spreadsheet Vera had insisted we keep for budget transparency. One by one, I removed my name from every section. Lodging, car rental, dinner plans, gift contributions, grocery rotations. I clicked Leave Folder without hesitation. After that, I sat down and drafted a message just for myself. Not to send, not to show. Just to name the thing I now knew with certainty. You weren't erased, you were replaced, and now, you're reclaiming. That night, no one knocked on my door. No one noticed my absence at dinner. No one asked why I'd skipped dessert or where I'd gone after lunch. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel hurt by their silence. I matched it. Before I left, I did one more thing. A single click that would rewrite the rules they thought I still played by. The first sign? A declined transaction. The second? Their expressions when I didn't offer to fix it. I woke up early, though I hadn't set an alarm. Maybe it was the weight of knowing I wouldn't be here much longer. The suitcase by the door was already packed. All I had to do was wait for morning to come fully, like waiting for a curtain to fall on a show I hadn't auditioned for, but was forced to act in anyway. At breakfast, I kept to myself. They didn't seem to notice. Or maybe they were pretending not to. Callista had brought something to the table, not food, not conversation, but a photo album. I had it printed as a surprise, she beamed. For Mom. Vera's eyes lit up. Oh, Callista, you didn't have to. They flipped through the pages, narrating each memory like it had happened only to them. Leora and Grandma at the dock. Declan and I on the paddleboards. 4th of July dinner, what a spread. I sipped my coffee in silence, knowing full well I'd been present for all of it. But when my own face finally appeared, arms full of towels, sun in my eyes, a rare smile not yet rubbed raw by the week's tension, I noticed the caption beneath it. Unidentified guest, LOL. The laughter that followed was casual, comfortable, as if none of them considered what it might feel like to be unnamed in your own family's scrapbook. I didn't laugh. I didn't ask questions. I didn't correct them. I stood, rinsed my mug, and went for a walk. It was humid outside, the kind of heat that sticks behind your knees and on the back of your neck. I made my way toward the resort's lobby for a coffee refill, thinking maybe a change of scenery would rinse the taste of that caption from my mouth. I had barely stepped into the lobby when one of the young staff members smiled at me. Hey there, are you one of the housekeepers? The Jennings family said you'd be around. I stared at him for a breath longer than necessary. Then I responded with clarity, not malice. No, I am the Jennings family. His smile faltered. I didn't wait for a response. I walked past him, grabbed my coffee, and stepped outside. Sitting on the stone bench near the parking lot, I opened my phone and typed a single line into my Notes app. Let them explain this version without me. When I got back to the house, it was mostly quiet. Callista and Vera were prepping dinner, humming to some acoustic playlist. Declan was half asleep in a hammock, and Leora was on her tablet, headphones in. I walked past them and into my room, closed the door, sat at the desk. I opened my laptop and logged into my financial dashboard. Then I began. First, I froze the shared grocery delivery account, the one they used weekly, billed to my name. Then Vera's Uber profile disabled. Streaming services? Gone. The spreadsheet folder for the family reunion ID set up last spring? I revoked access. One by one, I stripped away every resource they never thanked me for, but never hesitated to use. Then I opened the last tab. The family credit card. The one I'd co-signed. The one they believed was endlessly renewable, like my patience. I stared at the active status for a moment. Then I clicked. Freeze. Status. Inactive. No announcement. No ceremony. Just a quiet click a final punctuation mark. Then I leaned back, set my hands on my lap, and let the quiet come. Not relief, not vengeance, clarity. They didn't know it yet. But by dinner, everything they thought was still under control would stop working. They didn't know it yet, but by dinner, everything they thought was still under control would stop working. The trip ended in chaos for them. Accusations flying like seagulls startled off the shore, flapping and loud, spiraling into panic. For me, it ended with quiet. A closed door, a zipped suitcase, and a one-way ticket to someplace where I wouldn't have to shrink to fit or audition for a seat at someone else's table. I woke before dawn, not from restlessness, but because for the first time in a long while, I'd slept deeply enough to wake early. Not out of anxiety, out of clarity. The air in the house felt strange. Still, as if it, too, was holding its breath, aware something was shifting. Something final. The kind of shift you can't undo with apologies, or group texts, or family brunches. A slow turning of a page that won't flip back. My suitcase waited by the door, zipped and standing tall, like it knew we were both leaving something behind. The floors groaned under my steps as I made my way through the dim hallway. These old beach homes always had floors like that, honest in their age, unwilling to let you pass unnoticed. But I didn't care if the wood creaked. I wasn't hiding anymore. In the kitchen, with the hum of the refrigerator for company, I folded a note in half, then again, and tucked it under the salt shaker. Handled what I needed. No further responses required. I didn't write it to be cruel. I wrote it because it was true. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't look back. The ride to the airport was soft, muted. I said nothing to the driver, except, "Thank you," when he picked up my bag. He offered to avoid traffic. I told him the scenic route was fine. Let the coastline pass. Let the waves do their thing, crashing and retreating. Always busy, never still. I watched the ocean from the passenger seat and let it become a metaphor I didn't need to name. At the terminal, I sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. I opened my phone and tapped a folder tucked neatly into my email inbox. Proof no one asked for. Inside, screenshots, every receipt, every flight, every dinner reservation, every spa booking, each one bearing my name, while their photos got the tags, the likes, the compliments. While I stood just outside the frame, holding the phone, holding the plan, holding everything together. I didn't open the photos. I didn't need to relive it. Just seeing the folder was enough. It was real. It happened. I hadn't imagined the labor. I just finally decided not to volunteer it anymore. Somewhere over Mississippi, while my plane hummed toward Dallas, things started to unravel behind me. Vera tried to check out of the resort. Her card declined. She tried again. Declined. Callista, likely mid-brunch, attempting to order vegan groceries from her phone, got an access denied message she'd never seen before. Declan's phone buzzed with a failed car rental notification. The wheels, so used to turning without question, were locking in place. The family shared car dance, funded by me, maintained by me, protected by me, was frozen. By the time we landed, my phone was vibrating with the fallout. I turned it on at baggage claim. The screen lit up with a storm of notifications. Vera, what did you do? Callista, we're stuck. This is not funny. Vera again. Is this your idea of revenge? Callista, we can't even call an Uber. Fix it. Now. I didn't respond. I read them carefully, as if I were reading news about strangers. Then, without any anger, I tapped delete thread. No fireworks. No sense of triumph. Just weight, shifting, space, clearing, peace, blooming. In the terminal lounge waiting for my connecting flight, I opened the Notes app and began typing. My fingers didn't hesitate. I was never the problem. I was the platform. And I finally stepped off. I sat back, breathing in the strange calm of release, of no longer being available, of no longer playing a role I didn't audition for. A flight attendant walked past and offered me water. I took it, nodded, not in smugness, in stillness. I didn't think about Vera pacing, or Callista sending frantic messages, or Declan trying to keep the peace when he never once kept me safe. I didn't picture them. I pictured myself. A self untethered, unburdened. A self no longer writing the script for people who never gave her a speaking part. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even payback. It was a reset, the kind that doesn't come with a dramatic soundtrack, but with a quiet exhale, the kind where you don't slam the door, you remove the hinges entirely. Before I powered my phone down for the next leg of the flight, I checked one last screen. Family shared card status, permanently closed. No reactivation available, no appeals, just done. A few hours later, the sun dipped behind unfamiliar clouds as my new flight descended into a city I hadn't planned on, but had chosen. They'd booked round-trip tickets, assuming I'd return with them. But I wasn't on their itinerary anymore. For the first time, I was finally, on my own. The first morning back in Denver greeted me with a silence I didn't expect to find comforting. No vibrating phones tossed on countertops. No group texts buzzing with passive-aggressive emojis. No color-coded lists stuck to the fridge with cutesy magnets shaped like avocados. Just quiet. Real, living quiet. The sun cut soft gold across my kitchen, pouring through the gauzy curtains I had hung without anyone's opinion. I was barefoot in my favorite robe, the one with the stitched initials that no longer felt ironic. The scent of strong black coffee curled into the air, brewed in the machine I bought, maintained, and like most things in my life, now cleaned myself. I didn't expect a knock on the door. I wasn't waiting for an apology wrapped in flowers, or a voicemail with just the right inflection of remorse. But my phone still lit up, as if the past was reaching its hand under the door. 47 new messages. At the top of the screen, a notification from a group chat I hadn't seen since the week everything broke apart. Group name changed, Family Healing. I wasn't in the group. There was no invitation, just a quiet exclusion that somehow still spoke volumes. They weren't asking me back. They were building a new narrative, one I wasn't welcome in, but also no longer needed to be. Vera's voice filled my voicemail next. "We didn't raise you to be cold," she began, like that one sentence would pull me back into orbit, as if that was the final word on what love should look like. I didn't listen past that. I didn't need to. I pressed delete without saving, without replaying. Closure, I had finally learned, wasn't something they were ever going to offer, but I had stopped asking for it. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk, staring at a folder on my desktop titled, "Closure is Mine Now." It wasn't poetic when I named it, just functional. Inside were the remnants of war, screenshots of texts they thought I hadn't seen, call logs that proved their absences, bank statements tied to my stolen contributions, the voice memo from that night in the kitchen when my father's words slipped out unfiltered, and of course, that one photo from the party. The one where I was labeled as an unidentified guest. I hovered my mouse over the folder. I didn't need to reopen it. I already knew what was inside. I'd memorized it like a tragic monologue. But something shifted in me that day. Not vengeance, not even sadness, just clarity. I highlighted every file, right-clicked, renamed the folder, archived, no longer active. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. There was a time when I would have hesitated, afraid that letting go meant giving them permission to rewrite history. But it wasn't erasure. It was release. Those files were no longer evidence. They were echoes. And I didn't need echoes to tell my story anymore. A few days later, I wandered into a tucked-away bookstore Kath had never noticed before, nestled between an antique shop and a used record store. It had dusty corners and handwritten chalkboard menus, the kind of place you don't find unless you're lost or finally free. I ordered a strong black coffee and chose a seat by the window where the sunlight spilled like warm silk across the table. The barista, a girl in her 20s with glitter on her eyelids, handed me my cup and tilted her head. "I love your earrings," she said. "They look like they mean something." I reached up and touched the tiny silver moons dangling from my ear Soanes had found at a flea market in Santa Fe 2 years ago. I hadn't worn them in ages. "They do," I said, and smiled. Not for her approval, not because I needed to charm anyone, but because they did mean something, just not to anyone but me. Near the front register, I spotted a stand with travel brochures. One caught my eye, Solo Women's Hiking Retreat Zion National Park. I flipped it open, heart oddly steady. I read the details, then read them again. The wind whistled slightly outside the cafe door, brushing a fallen leaf past my boot. I took out my phone, scanned the QR code, and registered. There was no need to tell anyone, no need to justify the cost, ask for time off, or seek permission. It was my name, my card, my decision, and that was the most radical thing of all. On my way out, I passed a family sitting outside. A little girl leaned into her mother's lap, giggling, while her mom gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I watched them for a moment, not with bitterness, not even with longing. It wasn't envy I felt. It was recognition, the quiet kind you get when you remember wanting something that no longer fits. Like a coat you wore for years, until one day you shrug it off and realize it was never your color. Some families inherit peace. Others, like me, learn how to build it with their own 2 hands, on new ground, under no one's shadow. And sometimes that's the only kind that truly lasts. They say silence can be cruel, but sometimes it's where you find the clearest truth. For me, it wasn't about walking away in anger. It was about walking away with intention. When you've spent your life being the one who shows up, who smooths the wrinkles, who fills the gaps no one sees, there comes a time when you ask, who's showing up for me? I learned that setting boundaries doesn't make you cold, it makes you honest. And if honesty makes others uncomfortable, maybe it's because they've benefited from your silence for too long. Family, in its healthiest form, should be a place where your presence is not just tolerated, but cherished. If that's not the case, it's not betrayal to protect your peace. It's self-respect. Maybe you've been the invisible one at the table. Maybe your kindness has been turned into currency, your silence mistaken for consent. If so, this story was for you. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose your own peace over your family's approval? Have you ever walked away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally cared about yourself? Let's talk about it. Drop a comment below, just type 1 if this story hit home for you, or tell me what city you're watching from. If it didn't resonate, I'd still love to hear why this space is for every voice. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your voice matters here, and I'll be right here with the next story that just might feel a little too familiar.